Por muito tempo, a relojoaria foi definida por tradição, precisão e herança. Mas o tempo mudou. Hoje, os relógios estão sem fronteiras. Conectam-se ao esporte, à música, à cultura e encontram novos significados e mercados que antes estavam à margem dessa indústria. No episódio de hoje, pessoal, eu converso com Ric Delacroix, um dos protagonistas dessa transformação, com uma trajetória que passa pela expansão global de marcas como Hublot e pelo desenvolvimento de mercados-chave nas Américas. A partir dessa experiência, buscamos entender como a indústria evoluiu, como novos mercados estão se formando e qual é o papel da América Latina no presente e no futuro da relojoaria. Pessoal, muito obrigado por estar aqui assistindo a mais um vídeo do canal Relógios Sem Fronteiras. Deixa seu like, compartilha, curte a entrevista aí. Valeu! So, what I'm going to ask you first, Ric, if possible,
Sure.
For someone in my audience who doesn't know who Ric Delacroix is or how he helped architecture the watch industry as we know today in this marketing and world, can you just give me a brief introduction on how long you've been in the business, how you started, which brands you've worked in the past, and what are you up to these days?
Well, I have been in the industry this year. I don't look it, but I'm 57 years old. So I've been in the business now 26 years. Initially, I was like many young boys, and my dream was to play professional football. And I was actually with a professional team in England, and I came to Switzerland, where the origin of my family, to do a trial with a team called Neuchâtel Xamax, which was a Premier League team in Switzerland. And my football career didn't go very far. You realize when you get to a certain level that there are a lot of people much better, but that gave me a door. At the time, Neuchâtel Xamax was sponsored by Tag Heuer, and we're talking now of 1995, 96, and they were sponsored. Their sponsor was with Tag Heuer, and I had to work in the mornings and train in the afternoons 3 days a week, and then it was reversed. And by chance, I was involved in the industry, and it was an industry which I felt passion. I was taken under the wing by the president of the company, who was a big football fan, and he was like a godfather to me. He gave me the chance to learn the watch industry from the inside, starting in procurement, purchasing product, and I developed a passion, and I went back to school. I continued my education while working with Tag Heuer. I forgot about football completely. I'm still a big football fan, but I got it myself. I started. That was my education, really. My postgraduate life was working in the watch industry, and I've been there ever since. From Tag Heuer, I went back to work with Corum. Corum was a phenomenal experience because it was the first experience I had, first of all in Spain, and then Latin America, the Caribbean, the United States. I ended up working to Corum from Miami, and had some phenomenal years. Then Corum, I went to work with Gucci, Versace. I had experience in the fashion watch industry, which was another world completely. And then in 2004, the change in my life was when I met Jean-Claude Biver through a mutual friend of ours, Ricardo Guadalupe, who I'd known from Neuchâtel in Switzerland. And we got together. Jean-Claude was leading this new project called Hublot, and he was working with the family of the Hublot founder, Mr. Carlos Croix, and they launched Hublot, and I was there from day one. I started from day one as an independent distributor, but I was closely involved in product because that was somewhat of my background in marketing. And I think the rest there is a little bit of history, and I can tell you for hours and hours what happened. I think it's, many people may know, because really Hublot started off as a quartz watch. It developed with the Big Bang into an automatic watch, a sports watch, which initially was to compete a little bit with Audemars Piguet, but Biver was and is probably one of the biggest marketing geniuses of the industry, and especially in that period after he came from Blancpain, Mega, and Hublot, and he had a lot of obviously credibility, a lot of support from the press and retailers around the world. He was a little bit of the Steve Jobs. He was a man that made things happen, and people trusted him. And I was very lucky because, I was on that journey, and that journey, from Ayrton Senna in Brazil, I could Pelé. We did some just phenomenal marketing projects all over Brazil, in Brasilia, with the famous architect
Nehemiah.
Oscar Nehemiah. I met when he was 101 years old, and we actually created a structure for the World Cup in Brazil, and Flamengo, and I can go on and on and on. And I was part of that journey. I am from wholesale to retail. I opened up the retail division in the United States with 6 boutiques, and then that was a journey, and that was my career, and then 2023, there are changes in businesses today. We have corporate groups that have different visions from entrepreneurs, and they took a decision that they wanted to control, like many groups wanted to control the distribution and the marketing. And first it was Jean-Claude Biver, then it was myself to leave, and then third was Ricardo Guadalupe.
Yeah.
So that was the end of an era. That was in 2023, and then I took 2 years off. I was going to retire, and then I had a personal, I had a divorce, which I got divorced, which was costly and took a lot of time. And I realized I had too much time, and I had to go back to my passion, which was watches. And I started back again. I decided to relaunch Frank Muller and work with my partner, with Moser. And it's been a phenomenal 2 years. And this year, well, in 1 month's time, we'll be relaunching. I'm going back to my basics with Corum. So we're relaunching Corum at the next Watches and Wonders show, which I'm very excited about. So I'm keeping myself busy. I should be retired, but I'm not a great golfer. I'm not a great paddle player, and I wasn't the football player that I thought I was. So we're back to doing what I do best, which is building brands in the watch industry.
No, and we're grateful for that. We're grateful for that, because the sort of expertise and dynamics you bring, it's really it really changed the watch industry. I wasn't exaggerating. You just mentioned your close relationship with Beaver, and you guys really changed the approach to watches. You mentioned Flamengo, Pelé, Maradona, which I also know you were there with him. So do you think, when you look at the horology in aspects, do you think did you bring this change to horology in the world? Was it how do you see that? You fundamentally change it, or disruptive? How was the changes you've seen?
When we go back to Hublot, we had a phenomenal product, and we had a phenomenal marketeer, which was Beaver. But the reality is we didn't have the money. And so we had to be extremely creative. When you have a great product and you have people that have relationships, and I had relationships, notably in music, because I came from North. I was born and brought up in the north of England, the north of London. Sorry, not north of England, but north of London. So through a lot of relationships, we were able to get Hublot on the right wrists, and it became, and that time was an organic effect. Luxury wasn't in the space of football, so. And we were able to do deals which were very affordable, which today is impossible to do, because luxury was in football. Football, people saying, well, the fans aren't going to buy your watches, but they forgot the football players could buy the watches, and the football players were influencers. And we were able to sign some phenomenal agreements. In Brazil, we did the Senna Foundation. We did, as I said, Flamengo, Nehemiah, and these were all stories which created a snowball of press. There wasn't the world of social media as we understand today. That was right at the beginning, and we were very lucky to build a brand by word of mouth and by celebrity marketing that became a global phenomenon. It was there was a little bit with Audemars Piguet at the time. They were involved in skiing and motor racing with Schumacher and Barrichello, but really, Hublot was the first brand, I wouldn't say mass market, but to market luxury to celebrities.
Yeah.
And that was the snowball effect, which I would say would be the phenomenon. We did it with not a lot of money, but working the phone, friends of friends, We gave watches, that's true. We did product placement because we could afford to do that. And it took off. I think it was the right place and the right time. And many times people ask me, could you do that today? Absolutely not. We see how social media is detrimental to brands. It's very easy to make a brand and it's very easy to talk badly about the brand. But Hublot, like it or not, was the right place at the right time with the right people. And it was a hit. It was a massive hit, and I'm very proud of that journey,
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look back, I mean, art of fusion still, fusion and the original model also still one of the most sought after, one of the best classics, people can buy today. So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying you're right. I mean, for me, it's obviously being part of the journey. It's a classic. I'm wearing a Rolex. It's like in relationships, you don't want to talk about your ex relationships. Hublot was a big part of my life, and now we've moved on. And I wish them all the best. But I'm very proud of what I was part of.
Absolutely. No, you should be. You changed the watchmaking world, as I said. And as a marketeer, where do you draw the line? Because it's especially you were one of the groundbreakers on this, to market the watch in different spheres, as you mentioned, back then, luxury watchmaking wasn't in football, wasn't in sports so much. So where do you draw the line between what's substance in the watchmaking world, horology, and marketing? How do you define or separate those two? Where do you draw the line?
It's very, what was done 22 years ago, the market of 22 years ago is incomparable to today, where today you're judged. And every time that you post, you're judged by thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people. So you've got to be very, the world is, your life is public. The brand is public. You can find out what movements who makes the watch, what parts are made in Switzerland, what parts are made in Asia. It's today I think you have to be extremely consistent with the message. You can't mislead the consumer. And I don't want to say that brands misled in the past, but it was very hard to be questioned, if that makes sense. Today, you have to be consistent, you have to be truthful and transparent, and the line is you have to tell the truth, and you have to have a great message which you can back it up with product and price, because the consumer today is very savvy, and we don't live, we used to sell, we had huge years in Brazil. I mean, incredible years, not only what we sold in Brazil, but we sold to Brazilians who traveled. It's a different world today. Importation in Brazil is extremely complicated, extremely expensive. There are some of the biggest watch collectors in the world that live in Brazil, but they buy when they travel, and they keep, they buy in St. Bart's, they buy in Courchevel, they buy in Paris, Madrid, Lisbon. That's the truth, because the offering is not there, unfortunately, today. Hopefully tomorrow.
No, I don't think Brazil is very complicated in that. And yeah. And when you compare Brazil with the other Latin American countries, I know Mexico is a Hublot was such a huge success still to this day, when Hublot is. But what about Argentina, for example? We seem they have more heritage maybe in terms of watch collecting or importation, or is it easier to take watches and brands to other Latin American countries than Brazil?
Listen, there is not one country from Mexico down to Chile that is easy to import, and the fiscal side, the currency is complicated, customs is complicated, and I don't want to tell you why it's complicated, but it's complicated. So every market is challenging. I've had phenomenal years. It's about how the customers can get the goods in, obviously legally, and then sell and then make money. Many jewelers, the top jewelers, have never made money with watches in South America, but they've used it as marketing for their own jewelry. And you've over the years in Brazil, there was some phenomenal retailers like Natan, Drazen, that sold their own brand of watches in thousands of pieces, and they sold Breitling, they sold Bulgari. I remember Bulgari in Brazil being the biggest market for Bulgari watches in the early 90s. Again, how they did it, what tax, what they made, I don't know. But Bulgari watches were made by Brazilians, you know?
Wow. Wow. That's fantastic. Yeah. How do you see the watch industry today? I mean, we have these reports saying that the Swatch Group is really, going through a tumultuous time. It even issued like a letter in response to some of these reports. They're saying that the watch industry is shrinking. Gold is getting priced up. How do you see the industry these days?
I mean, listen, I've lived 23 years. I've lived through crises. I've lived through wars. I've lived through devaluations. COVID changed the world. It made people believe that wealth was limited. When people didn't travel for 2 years and they started to buy watches, there was a huge boom. And then people started to believe that owning a watch was like owning a house. You're going to make 5% a year, 10% a year. So this was all inflated, it was badly inflated. But the watch brands, many of them followed this belief and built factories and opened retailers and closed distributors. I wouldn't say a victim, but I was part of that process, which for me was understandable because it's a business and the big businesses are owned by corporate billion dollar groups, be it LVMH, be it Richemont, be it Swatch Group, a public company. So they need to make money. They need to make money at the highest margin with the least amount of expense. So the world has been inflated. We're going back to normality, and perhaps even we're going through very challenging times with this war that we're through in the Middle East. So it's very misty. It's foggy. What the future will bring, I don't know. Who knows? Hopefully, Brazil will open up. Hopefully, America will drop its tariffs. Who knows? It's just the watch industry will all be there, but we know today that there are less and less major brands, and this is what we're looking at, what we call the Trinity, those key brands that are really 70% of the total exportations. That's the reality.
I might be going off a limb here, but I don't know if you would describe the watch industry as quite boring. Is that right? You still feel that? Is it still boring, or is it pretentious, or how?
Listen, I'm not motivated by a lot of the people that work in the industry. They're not people that I learn from. I aspire. I believe life is education, and over the years, I've been very fortunate to meet people in many different worlds where I've learned from. I learned from Beaver. That's without a doubt. I've learned from a few people, but in general, I don't find the creativity in management. When you have crisis, you have to find solutions and opportunity. And we're going through a time where there should be opportunities perhaps for South America, because we're far away from the war. People won't travel, and that may give opportunities for the nomads to go further down. I own property in Colombia, and I spend a lot of time in Colombia, and we have a lot of nomads in Medellin. Medellin has become a nomad city. Who says that can't be tomorrow Rio or Sao Paulo? And these governments, at the end of the day, if they can make it more affordable to consume, then perhaps there'll be a market there, because it's not the money that's missing in Brazil. It's the cost of the goods that are offered, which restricts that booming market. Brazil has the potential. I don't know if on par with Mexico, but it should be a big watch market.
Yeah, there's a huge potential here, I think. And at least the last couple of years, the watch industry picked up really, a lot in terms of brands. Obviously, social media, I think, plays a big part of that. As we were discussing, everything's much more exposed and immediate these days, and at least for the trend that we've seen is that there's a more a younger audience going into watches now, and I'm not talking smart watches. I'm going, back to the automatic, the classical dress watches. We see a lot of young kids here in Brazil starting to appreciate that. I think in a way that's where the independents come in when you talk about creativity and all that. I think the independent seems to be doing quite well. There's a lot of big market for them. They can, they have much more control over the decisions in a way.
I mean, like I said, when I ended my relationship with LVMH, because obviously we did Hublot, Tag Heuer, and Zenith, and I took my time off. I considered what I wanted to do and who I wanted to work with, or be partners with. And we found one of them was obviously to relaunch Frank Muller that had a limited exposure in the areas, the territories you wanted to work. I love the product. I love, it's a manufacturer, and it totally integrated manufacturer, that from the dial to the strap to the cases made in house. And then obviously I was with my partner being involved with the Moser, with H Moser, which is exactly that target community of a younger crowd that appreciates, provocation on the wrist. Let's call it that. What they've done has been phenomenal, and the dials and the colors and the way of marketing has been phenomenal. So that's where I find creativity. I don't find creativity when the people I've met in groups. I'm not saying there aren't good managers, but when you have that much power and that much capital to invest, and I know what we did at the time, as independently in Hublot, I feel that there's a lack of creative and strategic management.
Yeah. Are you guys coming back here with Frank Muller back to Brazil? Because you had a retail shop you closed a few months ago.
Yeah, I mean, again, we have some phenomenal friends there, some great retailers in Brazil, and we met last year at the show, and we will meet again. The question is, again, it's the importation and how the product is then positioned with all the taxes in Brazil. Is there a consumer willing to spend X amount above the US retail? That's the biggest challenge today. I really believe there's a potential for Frank Muller in Brazil. It did very well with Nathan years ago. It did well with the store in Sao Paulo. So
yeah,
fingers crossed. It's a crazy world. We have to see what our governments negotiate with the lowering of the fiscalization of Swiss watches, which we've been told for many years is going to be lowered soon in Brazil. So let's see.
And then can we talk about Bomberg? Because after all this time as well, you working with groups, independents, you then went out and set out your own brand. You co-founded Bomberg, which I'm actually wearing one because I got it. Nice one.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I love this one. Let's see if I can.
Thank you very much. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it gets a lot of comments. Everybody loves the case, the shape of the case as it sits on my wrist. Although it's huge, it's so comfortable and good to wear, man. I love this.
Well, when again, if you said to me what I would have done and not have done in my life, I'm not sure I would have created a watch brand on my own. But I'm passionate, and since 2012, when you have the creativity to do what you want, at the end of the day, you're the one that makes the money or loses the money. So it's been a phenomenal ride. Creativity. We've always tried to be different from watch design to marketing. We're still there. We're still going strong. We've been very lucky as well that, again, COVID changed everything, because our online business has absolutely exploded. We're working less markets internationally with a big focus on the United States and Mexico. And we're building online communities. That's where I see the future.
So you'll be attending Watches and Wonders this year with Corum?
I will be with Frank Muller, and I will be visiting Moser, and I will be visiting Corum. So I have two operational partners that manage Moser and Corum, because these brands need a lot of love and attention. And I'll be spending my time between Frank Muller, which is not in the show. It's at the premises, the Watchland premises. So it's a great place to relax, and I see all my friends who are retailers that come by. It's a little bit stressful from the show where every 30 minutes you've got to kick people out the office. So I'll be going over. I'll be moving between the three different brands. Yes.
Fantastic. And just so everyone understands, your role for these brands is to take them, to the Americas, in a way, to the United States, and that's your area of expertise.
No, I mean, my specialty, I did with Hublot, I did the boutique, so the retail division in the United States, and then I had the wholesale from Mexico, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and then we did many brands over the years: MB&F, Beauvais, Croix, HYT, Gucci, obviously, and today, it's like I said, I'm getting a little bit older, and I want to focus on where I enjoy doing business. In the United States, you need, first of all, both of those companies have their own offices and distributions there. So we started with both Moser and Frank Muller basically redeveloping the market because they weren't present in Latin America. Frank Muller, they had a few doors, Venezuela, Costa Rica, but they weren't really present. And Moser was not. Oh, sorry, it was in one door in Mexico. So we took over the distribution, and we rebuilt the brand. I mean, we built the brand in the market that was emerging, and we've had really phenomenal results because it's the product and the marketing is really Mexican, and I think it would have tremendous success in Brazil as well. So yeah, I'm focused. Before COVID, we had 160 people working in our different offices. I had the office in Miami, Switzerland, Venezuela, and Bogota, and even Panama. And I was doing many brands, so it was a different world. And like I said, I don't want to say I'm getting old because I've never said that, but I want to be, I want to manage differently my life, and focus, give a lot more focus. If I'd only taken Hublot in 2004 and hadn't taken the other brands of the group and hadn't taken the other many brands, I think I would have had a much happier and easier life. I created a lot of stress by wanting to do too many things. So as I've got older, it's focus, it's taking time, it's enjoying my health and my family, and enjoying what I do, which is the world of watches.
Absolutely. I've seen that India is actually going to Watches and Wonders this year with Titan, one of the largest groups of watch in that region.
So,
do you see any potential there in India?
Yeah,
there are similarities between Latin America and India in terms.
I mean, I think if you take the population of the economy, and obviously I think it's 1.3 billion in India, and if you would say your target of luxury, and what do we say luxury? Luxury hotels, luxury restaurants, luxury clothing, jewelry, watches. Of course, there's a huge market there. The thing is, when wealth develops, and I lived in Latin America, and I saw certain countries 20 years ago where you couldn't leave Colombia because you didn't have a visa. And so Colombians bought in Colombia. And when the visas became accessible to travel, the first thing people did was travel and buy watches in Madrid or buy watches in London or Miami or New York. And I think India's the same thing. A lot of Indians are traveling, and a lot are coming to Switzerland. They want to come and see the Alps. They want to take the train rides. They want to see the lakes. So they buy their Swiss watch when they're in Switzerland. When you're wealthy, you're not looking at the tax. The same thing for us people that pay taxes and work hard. It's different.
Yeah. Hopefully I'll be. I'm actually going as well to Watches and Wonders this year. So hopefully I'll be.
Please reach out and come and see us. It's my pleasure to receive you.
No, thank you. Most kind of you. Thank you very much. I know you said you focus, but you bring a lot of unique expertise and experience being in the industry so long. How do you see the future of horology? Do you think will be technical innovation? Do you think will be this link with cultural relevance, new markets like maybe Latin America or India, or these partnerships and working with politicians? How do you see the future of watchmaking?
Listen, I think the wake-up call that we've seen the last 2 years, when China closes down or China's slower, and the US decides to put tariffs and less tourism are coming to Switzerland, you find all of a sudden there's a collapse. And we realize that, again, luxury, again, at the end of the day, is an emotion, and it's a very fragile emotion. When everything goes well, we're not scared to spend money. When we see and hear negative news, then we don't spend. It's that's the reality of life. And I don't know if I'm very worried of the world. I have young children. I have 3 children, and it concerns me when I look at the news and I see all these different political factors that could definitely influence their livelihoods. And you say, well, where is the importance of watches in a crazy world that we live in? Yeah, the results of those top watch brands, I mean, I'm not talking about the Swatch Group or perhaps even the LVMH watch division. They're posting growths, small growths, but they continue to do their in excess. I think Rolex is at 10 billion, Richard Mille at 1.4 billion, Patek at 2.5 billion. I mean, it's crazy. It is crazy. So what changes could we expect in the luxury? The people that wealthy will always be able to consume. What today that are the micro brands going to be the thing, buying directly from watchmakers? We're seeing this more and more. These micro watchmakers that are making some phenomenal products, and they're their own marketing companies, they're their own retail companies. They sell online 30 watches a year, 50 watches, 100 watches a year. In the macro effect, it doesn't mean much, but it does, for us in the industry, that didn't exist 30 years ago,
Yeah, yeah.
But we also said that Apple watches would kill the watch industries, and I'm still selling, we sell 4,500 Bombergs, of which 4,000 are quartz watches. So, Apple didn't kill us,
No, no. I need to ask because I think the watch industry owes a lot to this brand, and this brand is very secretive. I don't know if you had any relationship with Rolex, but why is Rolex so uptight and doesn't release any figures, how many watches they make or how many watches they sell? Everything is speculative, no interviews. How come? And still, by doing that, they managed to use that on their favor and create this juggernaut that doesn't change, doesn't create new models, very specific with that advanced technical innovations, which they're very good, great production. But Rolex is very unique when you look at the watch world. It's very particular the way they operate their business. They run their foundation. Do you have any dealings? Ever had any dealings with them? How's your perspective on Rolex?
I worked 4 years with the actual president of Rolex because we were the distributor of Zenith. And I had, I know who he is and I know what he does, and he was a fantastic leader at Zenith, and he's absolutely changed the Rolex dynasty I think it's 12 years now he's been there, Jean-Fred. So, in Switzerland, when you've spent so many years in the industry, and I've traveled and I've been able to meet directors and managers of the brand, they are extremely confidential, but they have a roadmap that no other Swiss company has ever been able to replicate, and they believe, they are honest to their retailers, they're honest to their customers, they believe in service, and they are really, we all aspire to be a Rolex, a little Rolex somewhat, because they are the absolute professionals of our industry. And it's great when you see these foreign groups, the LVMHs coming in, buying companies and et cetera, and you say, well, Switzerland still has a crown, and it's Rolex, and we have Patek Philippe, and I'm very proud to be Swiss, and I'm very proud that Rolex is by far the leader, and they are an inspiration to me. I've learned a lot just by seeing what they do. I can't tell you any inner details. I've met some of their managers. I worked with the present president, but it's phenomenal. It's brilliant what they've done, and people trust honesty. They've never misled. They've always been honest, and I think what they tried or they did achieve with the president. You saw the power. They went to the United States on behalf of the Swiss watch industry and lobbied, and I don't know how much it had involvement, but we had those tariffs reduced on Switzerland's biggest luxury watch market.
Yeah, absolutely. I usually end my interviews with this question, and I love to hear your thought on this. How would you define time? What is time for Ric Delacroix?
The biggest luxury in life is time. And as you get older, you realize that time is like an autoroute, a motorway, as you say in England. It's you're born and you die, and that's outside of birth and death. The only other thing that's sure is you're going to pay taxes. So you have to enjoy your time on this planet, and it goes very fast. I can't believe sometimes that I started and I finished already my Hublot. Well, I thought it would be till the end of the days, but it finished, and that's time's measurable. And you know, a timepiece today, when you buy a luxury watch, is because of an emotion of that particular moment, or it's a gift. So it's something. Time is very precious, and I always say it's the journey of life.